Brace yourself. Get it passed up anytime now. Collect yourself. Things will never be the same in this sad, sad world.
Okay, good morning, everybody. You may not realize this, but at least as of yesterday, you have all become historians. Historians, of course, are the people who do history, who study history. What is history? Somebody tell me, what's history? It's not a trick question. Well, Larry, what do you think history is? I can't see you.
I don't hear. Record event.
A record of events. So events that took place in the future, in the past. Record of events in the past, or the story of the past. Specifically, stories of the past that make the attempt to be true. I say make the attempt to be true because if I don't have a time machine, I can never be 100% certain if a story is true, but I build evidence, all right? And when I have enough evidence, I can say this is likely to be true. This is the most probable explanation. Because there are some questions of history that you'll never be 100% sure about, okay? Especially when we talk about questions of motivation. Why did people do the things they do? Why did a terrorist attack at a certain place? Well, you can look at evidence and you could say, well, he had this political motivation, he might have had this version of a religious motivation. But honestly, you can't ever get inside someone else's head. So you can say it's likely that he was motivated by a particular politics, a particular version of religion, but you can't know for sure. He might have asked a girl to the prom in high school and she said no, and he's been mad at the world ever since and just looking for someone to punish for that, okay? You can't know for 100% certain. So we say that history attempts to be true. History tries to find out what's most probably true. You all are now historians, if you weren't before, because you're working on telling the history of you. And we probably don't usually think about our own life stories as history. All of us, most of us at least, are not famous. Most of us won't live the kinds of lives that get you mentioned in the history book. Most of us will never have, nobody's going to have a poster of Jeff Childers on the wall in their classroom 100 years from now, as far as I know. Some of you might. I mean, one of you might be president 40 years from now. I don't know. But most of us don't. Most of us live more ordinary lives. And so we don't tend to think of our own stories as history. But they are. Because if I were to tell the whole story of Florida after the year 2000, your story is part of that story because you're in Florida after the year 2000. Same if I were to tell the whole story of the United States in this third millennium. Well, you're part of that story. And you're part of the world story. You're part of the universe's story. And we'll see that more next week when we connect your history to bigger and bigger histories, but you've all become historians. I want to spend a few minutes today. We're going to use a video to guide our discussion. I want to discuss a little bit about how history is done and the usefulness of history. Now, history is one of the humanities. Remember, this is a family of disciplines that we look at in this class, and history is one of them. Does anyone remember what when we finally revealed what the definition of humanities is? Do we remember what that was, in person or online? Okay, go ahead, pull them up. Valeria's going to tell us, unless someone online beats her to it. So the race is on. You're welcome, Ashley. Valeria's digging through her notes.
I don't want to read.
Well, then why did we just wait for you to turn to your notes if you didn't want to read them? No, not you.
No. Mm-mm.
I will read Valeria's notes. Oops. All right. Humanities, otherwise known as the liberal arts, is the study of those aspects of human society and culture, the knowledge of which is intrinsically good. So the main reason we do history is not because of how we can use it, but because our world's story is good to know, knowledge for its own sake. But just because something is intrinsically good doesn't mean it can't also be instrumentally good, that it can't also be useful. Okay? It's just usefulness is not the main reason we pursue it. So we're going to take a little look today at the usefulness of history. It's going to take me a second to share here because I always do everything wrong 10 times before I do it right. And we'll be pausing to talk. I did it wrong. I didn't enable sound. Every time. Do it again. Here we go.
What makes history useful, usable? More specifically, what makes the history we teach in schools useful and usable for our students? Or maybe I should ask it from the point of view of students. Like, why do we have to learn any of this stuff? Most students have just 1 year of world history in high school, 1 year to learn something meaningful, something usable. We think that meaningful something they can learn is to use their historical thinking skills to put facts and evidence together to tell stories and to evaluate other stories about the global past. This will help them to make sense of history and how it applies to themselves and their communities in the present. Let's take that apart a bit by looking at the long debate we have had about what to do in the history classroom. For well over the almost 50 years I've been teaching history in either a public high school or a public university, politicians and educators have waged war over this question with intense and emotional ferocity between two competing camps, each believing in the correctness of their positions and the disaster that looms should the other side win. One group argues it's a set of essential or core facts, names, dates, and events that make history so important, as they march under the banner, "Content and facts matter most." Or so some people, including me, have long argued and fought for. No, 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 their opponents respond. Memorizing facts is trivial compared to learning how to do history the way historians do history, how to read and think like historians. As they wave the banner, critical thinking matters most. Or so some people, including me, have argued and fought for. But what if...
So you've got these two sides in this debate over what the most important aspect of history is. And so Bob Bain here has portrayed them as content versus skills. So you've got some who argue, the important thing about history is to get the data, the information, the names, the dates, the places. All right. In the history that you're writing right now, that's the actual things that you plot on the timeline. Okay. Others argue that it's about skills, about understanding how to do history, how to process information, how to figure out what sources are reliable. Right? That's what you're doing before you write anything down on the page, is you're building your skills. Because you're all working with, hopefully we know the difference between primary and secondary sources, though we'll have a refresher on that in a few days. But in this history that you're building in your timeline, you're dealing with primary sources. Because you are the primariest, which is not really a word, but I'm in charge, so too bad. The primariest source of all primary sources when it comes to your own story. Okay. So there's this tension between people who emphasize content and people who emphasize skills. You notice that the presenter on this video has put himself in both camps. Both are equally important for him.
There's a little bit of truth on both sides. What if students can learn how to use their historical skills to build stories from those facts and evidence, stories that help them in their daily lives? Well, let me tell you a story. I spent time designing a history course for students in Detroit, and we used a big driving question: why did people throughout history move in and out of the Detroit area, to structure the entire course. We began by asking students what they thought motivated and caused people to move into and out of Detroit. What had the students heard? What did they know about migration to their city? Were these personal stories, family stories, stories they learned in school, in their neighborhood, in their church, synagogue, or mosque? Were any of these stories connected to any larger history of the United States or the world? Without too much of a setup or discussion, the class collected the stories they told, looking for similarities and differences between and among their ideas, their stories about why people would move in and out of their city. And then, over the course of the school year, students investigated changes in migration patterns to Southeast Michigan and their impact over thousands of years, looking for, analyzing, and interpreting evidence to consider various reasons why different people, indigenous peoples, European settlers, African Americans, immigrants from Asia, Mexico, or the Middle East migrated to and from this community, and how it compared to other communities, both in the United States and elsewhere.
So in this example, so he's teaching in the city of Detroit, and so he's teaching about Detroit in Detroit to people from Detroit. What's the question they're exploring? What's what he called the driving question? What are his students trying to find out in this example? That's right. That's right. If you didn't hear Cynthia, she said they're trying to find out what motivates people to move in and out of Detroit. Now, just to put this, and we're not here today to learn about Detroit, by the way. This is just one example of historical investigation. But in this example, the city of Detroit, if you're not familiar with it, was once a huge economic hub for the United States. It used to be where nearly all American cars were made. If you graduated high school in Detroit in the 1950s, 1960s, or early 1970s, you could walk into an excellent job. You could buy a house when you were 22 years old. You could support your family without ever having to worry. Okay? No college needed, because there's plenty of work. Plenty of work. Today, Detroit is on the verge of dying. The factories, the automobile factories have all left. It is full of buildings that are falling apart. The population that is left behind suffers from extreme poverty, no access to work or opportunities, high crime, high drug addiction. Drug addiction usually comes along with poverty because when we feel hopeless, we sometimes look to things that aren't so healthy to take our mind off of it because the healthy things aren't available to us. Okay, so Detroit is a community in grave trouble. And there are many other communities like that in the U.S. and all over the world. Many of us come from communities with very similar struggles. So the question that these students are exploring is a very real question to them. It's, what happened to this place? What happened to my home? That's a question that Many of my students have asked about their own homes, even though they're not Detroit. So over the course of the year, what are they trying to do to answer this question? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Pause. Come here. I've got the microphone. Dang it, we're going to use it. Okay. Cynthia, again, tell us, what are the students doing to try to find the answer to their question?
Oh, darn, I forgot. They're kind of doing stuff. They're trying to gather background knowledge that they have and find similarities and differences between their information, while also interpreting and gathering evidence on migration patterns from southern Michigan and comparing that to migration patterns in the United States as well as other places. Okay, cool. Bye.
So that they're gathering all this evidence. They're making comparisons between what's going on in their own locality and other places in the country. And they're also looking, remember he said that they look back for thousands of years? Okay, so they're trying to situate, to place the story they're looking at in context of a much larger story. All right. So no single story stands in isolation. All right. The story of me telling Valeria to put her phone away is connected to much larger and wider stories. Okay. Nothing just exists in a vacuum or in isolation.
In their studies, students worked, as historians do, with primary sources and other historians' interpretations of these events to construct narratives about migration to and from Detroit.
If narrative is a new term for you, it's just a way of saying story. A narrator is the person telling the story, so a narrative is just another word for story.
Moving from the present to the earliest beginnings of humans' presence on Earth and back again, over and over, students looked at individual stories, community stories, national and global stories. They considered how these accounts supported, extended, or challenged the stories they brought with them as they learned to frame the events of the past in different ways. And they considered the implications of using different stories to make sense of the past, the present, and to anticipate the future. By using the power of narrative, multiple narratives, students were able to situate themselves within a larger history that connects to their world today. But it also helped them to see the history of their city in a far more nuanced and complex way, through the eyes of multiple people, at multiple levels, over an extended period of time. Now, this is not easy work.
So he talks about them exploring multiple narratives, all right, many stories. So there's the story of the city, but what is a city? All right, well, a city is a certain territory, right? So there is a geography story to tell about the city. You know, are there mountains? Are there lakes? What's the climate? Does it freeze? Detroit does freeze. Does it get earthquakes? Does it have volcanoes? Detroit does not have volcanoes. There's a geography story, but it's also a political unit, a city is. So there's a story about the laws and government. There's a story about the people who don't follow the law. There's a story about the people who enforce the law and how those people treat the people in the other column. There's a cultural story. Who are the people who live there? Where did they come from? What are their values? What are their beliefs? What diverse communities exist within that group? So by looking at multiple narratives when trying to explore a history question, why do we do that? Why look at multiple narratives? Why would I try to find out what is what's the story that the Detroit police have to tell, and what's the story that the Detroit gangs have to tell? And what's the story that the 80-year-olds in Detroit have to tell? And what's the story that the young women in Detroit? Many stories. What do I get when I do that? Why do I do that? Raise your hand, Andrew. Oh, okay. Somebody at home. What's the benefit of listening to multiple stories when I'm trying to do history? What do you think? Who am I going to pick on? Marlene, what do you think? If I'm trying to do history, why would I want to listen to multiple stories instead of just one? Oh, somebody's bailing you out. Somebody's bailing you out. They can't hear you.
To like build a narrative, like general like
Great, Michael. And when I look, Natalie has both. Natalie first. And ladies and gentlemen, Miss Natalie Guevara.
Um, you need to hear all sides of the story because everybody's impacted differently. Like more people could be making there, so they could live in richer areas, like gated communities. And also, well, the whole point is to get a different perspective. I feel like that's the most important part because everyone goes through something different.
Yeah, and so when you get those different perspectives, like Natalie said, Onyx said different points of view. It's if I'm trying to build a puzzle, I need as many pieces as possible. Yeah. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Onyx. Cynthia.
Extending on the fundamental basis of multiple perspectives, when you're recording history, even if it's your own, you actually really do want to be as objective as possible. There's a degree of subjectivity that you can, include in your history, but in the end, you're gonna have to be as objective as possible. So gaining those multiple perspectives is a great way to meet people impartial to you who will give you, the truest version of the story they can tell, which, in the end contributes to a greater truth in a sense. And it prevents or at least decreases the opportunities of a skewed view or of what truly happened.
Yeah, that's excellent. Because even if you're telling your own story, all right, well, you may have something to say about when you were 2 years old, but there are probably people in your life who know about your life when you were two better than you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's excellent. When Cynthia draws a distinction, she uses the words objective and subjective, if those are new or rusty terms for anybody. So objective reality is what something is. Subjective reality is my experience of what something is. When we talk about perspective, points of view, remember that's a key theme in this class. We have very little access to objective reality. What we have is our point of view. And if I don't want to just be stuck with my point of view, because what do I know about your life? Very little. I have to make assumptions unless I want to invite you to bring your point of view into the conversation. So when we tell multiple stories, when we listen to multiple stories, we hear from multiple points of view. We bring in many pieces of the puzzle, and that gives us a fuller picture of reality. But that raises a problem. Let me share. Why won't it let me share pictures? Give me just a second, guys. Sorry. Open with Chrome, and it'll be fine. Open with. Sorry. Technical issue. It won't take long. Just work. Do as I command. All right. So, if you run into somebody who claims that the Earth is a triangle, okay? All the scientists are wrong. All the scientists is just science is a conspiracy. Science is a hoax. The Earth is a triangle. Well, that's a perspective you probably hadn't heard before. So, are we saying that that perspective is also important to consider when trying to understand the story of the Earth? Michael says yes. What do you think? Do we need to understand the story of the Earth? Do I also need the perspective of the person who says the Earth is a triangle, even though that seems so obviously wrong? Natalie's shaking her head yes.
No.
Cynthia's saying yes. Who just said that? Gregory said no.
Yeah.
Remember the metaphor of a puzzle. Not every puzzle piece is the same size. So, here's what the triangle Earth puzzle piece is like and where its value is and is not. Because claiming that the Earth is a triangle is a pretty extraordinary claim. And what do extraordinary claims demand? A lot of evidence, extraordinary evidence. So, when someone is saying the Earth is a triangle, if they're not opening up with a huge mountain of evidence that overshadows all of previous science, then that's a perspective that doesn't help us understand geography or math. It doesn't contribute anything to those conversations. But the Earth is more than geography. The Earth is also a biosphere, a collection of living things. And one of those living things is us. And humans have cultures. And the fact that someone claims the Earth is a triangle doesn't tell us much about the shape of the Earth, but it tells us something about that part of the Earth that is us. It tells us about human culture, about how people think, about how people treat evidence, about how conspiracy theories bloom and grow. So even that perspective, which is without a mountain of new and surprising evidence, is, frankly wrong. Even that perspective has something to teach us. We can learn something even from that perspective. We can learn something even from so that's an example of someone who's sloppy thinking, okay, who has a bad idea. We can learn something from perspectives that are not just bad but evil. So what does a racist perspective have to tell us? Well, that puzzle piece doesn't tell us anything about how people should treat each other. It doesn't tell us anything about what human races are actually like, but it does tell us about how bad ideas spread. It does tell us about how we should not treat one another. It can help us understand how people get to be that way in the first place, so that we may not feel a lot of sympathy with a racist at first, but without empathizing with how people get that way, then we can't solve the problem of people continuing to get that way. So even that perspective has something to teach us. It's just that puzzle piece isn't about what races are actually like or how people should treat each other. It's about just the opposite. Okay, we're just going to finish up the video real quick.
Mr. Childer, I think you're not sharing the screen.
What's up? Are you not seeing it?
No.
Yeah, we're not seeing it.
Oh, okay. Hang on just a second. I'll run it back. There's not long left anyway, so don't worry. This isn't gonna ruin your
Hey,
day.
Mr. Childers,
Yes.
can the whole class hear me like this?
Yes.
Oh, hey, Valeria.
Valeria's got a fan club. Okay. Enable sound. This should work now.
This is not easy work. Indeed, it is far more difficult than just helping students learn a core set of facts or a core set of practices. Yet, there is strong evidence that this approach will help students not only learn the names and dates of history, not only apply the skills of historians adeptly, but to put these ideas to work. And they do have work to do. Students, and indeed all of us, are constantly bombarded with stories about the past that other people create to get them and us to see or do things in a particular way. And students, and indeed all of us, must make decisions about the present that involve understanding what happened in the past. In both cases, we all need to understand important content and facts. We all need critical thinking skills to make informed judgments. And we all need to know how to take apart, work with, and create multiple stories about the past that influence how we think and act in the present. Stories are vital and essential in making history usable, and a feature that schools have too long ignored in their focus on history's facts and thinking practices. Adding narratives to history courses promises to make them far more usable and useful. It will sharpen students' awareness of the stories and narratives they met before and during their courses, and will meet long after they've taken their last history course. So, what are your stories, and how will you use them?
Okay, and that's exactly what we're working on. We're working on what your stories are. I'm going to take a second run through attendance now. So if you came in after the first time I took attendance and were marked absent, we'll be fixing that now. So please answer when I call your name if you are here. Tier. Manuel. Fabian. Jazibi. Matthew Munoz. Jeremiah Reno. Nicole Vera. Corey. Okay, we're good. No change since the beginning. Okay, everybody. Couple of quick announcements, and then I'm going to turn you loose. Please remember that progress reports go out Monday. I have put zeros in the grade book for our third assignment, applying the concepts of liberal arts, or applying the, thank you for the update. Bella is still here. Applying the concepts of instrumental and intrinsic good. That doesn't mean you're stuck with those zeros. You can still turn them in for full credit. Please understand, when you turn in something late, I can't guarantee that it's going to be graded right away because I'm not always in a position to drop what I'm doing and grade something that was due days and days and days ago, but it will get graded. So, you know, if you're sitting, if you're one of the few who hasn't turned in anything, you're about to get a progress report that says 0 on it, and there's just no reason for that. So get that work in. Yes, Patrick?
I don't like the assignment that you just gave us that's due the 20 or the 21st, because I was doing it and then I was about to submit it. Something happened and made me restart all the way from the beginning.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened. I can't imagine your computer glitch was the fault of the assignment, but the good news is we've got several days to go. So I know that's frustrating. Always save as you're going, or if you want to make sure you're not going to lose your work, do it on paper and take a picture of it. But yeah, what Patrick was talking about, the new assignment, the Stories in Stardust Part 1, the timeline, that's due Monday. So you're welcome to stay here live with us if you'd like, but at this point, you don't have to. Tomorrow we'll have an open forum. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm here if you have any questions.
Walk around a lot a bit, trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million missing pieces. When I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So slip back in your hole, or get back in your cave. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with me.